Hello, we're back. We have a little background now. We realize that we have this here, even though we were sitting over there before. So I'm Aileen Dashrova, and this is my friend Lissa Black-Fassett, and we have been getting together and talking about her son's accidental overdose and death because of heroin use. That happened to him when he was 23 years old. It was 5 years ago while he was attending UMass Amherst. So today we're going to talk briefly about the signs that Lissa and her husband Dan noticed. They saw things that were going on, but everything had an explanation. Everything had an explanation. And now afterwards, putting it all together, they can see that, oh my gosh, this is probably what was going on. This was probably what was going on. Now, their understanding is that Darby probably was not doing heroin for very long. We talked in the clip yesterday, or last clip, about the young man who died, and the article is really great. It's about ending secrecy of your child's addiction, and they went through an extremely arduous process of trying to help their son, and that was not the situation with Dan and Lissa. Theirs was a complete blindsided surprise when they got the phone call. And so just a reminder, Dan and Lissa had spoken with Darby. Darby had called them one day and just chatted like normal. Everything's great, everything's fine, wonderful, life is good. And then later that night, Lissa's cell phone rang, and when she picked it up, she saw Darby's name on it and expected, I think it was like 11 o'clock or something, and expected to hear Darby's voice. And isn't that interesting that he'd be calling this late? And instead of Darby, it was paramedics saying that they were trying to save his life. And then Dan and Lissa got in their car and drove out to Northampton to the hospital, and Darby was dead when they got there. And so today, Liz is going to talk about what things that she saw, even during that brief time, and I will just mention a few other things after she shares about what things your child possibly could be doing that could be hints that they're into heroin or any other kind of drugs and addicted. So,
well, and when I as I go over this in my mind, and I think about there was kind of there was a trail of red flags, of signs, and when I looked back from a distance, I want to hit myself in the head. What was I not thinking? On the other hand, every single one of these incidents had another possible and probable explanation, and that's another thing. So I guess, and again, we don't have any evidence that he was doing heroin for more than maybe 6 months, something like that, at the most. And this is when we started seeing these signs too. And I guess the first one was probably maybe the most obvious one. But at one point, my mother-in-law had left a car for Darby. It was an antique car, and she thought that he would really enjoy that when he got older, just to have. And I drove the car up to, we had a halfway meeting point so Darby and I could switch cars, and his car was in the garage, and he needed some transportation, so I thought, well, I'll drive this car up and we'll switch cars. And I didn't see anything wrong with that at all, and I didn't see anything wrong with the car or anything like that. But later on, after Darby died and we got the car back, there were needles in the trunk. There were needles in the trunk. This isn't after he died, no, pardon me. This was before we got the car back, and we were cleaning out the car, and Dan noticed that there were needles in the car. And both of us said, oh yeah, well, that makes sense, because the previous owner of this car was a diabetic, and he also lived in this car for a little while, and it was all cleaned out. By the time we got it, they must have missed something. So there was even an explanation for that, and that was one of the first signs. And it just didn't resonate in any way
because the kid's doing heroin, right? And again, suburban kids, kids from particular neighborhoods or whatever, they don't do heroin.
Exactly.
Again,
The myth was
that's right.
alive in my mind.
Right. Why would you even search? That's one of the challenges. Why
Yeah.
would we even search to think that it's heroin when, and as I said, and I think the first clip, we expect our kids to do pot. We expect our kids to do, to drink. I don't want to say expect like we applaud them or think that's great, but there's just sort of this rite of passage that happens. Maybe kids are going to do shrooms. There's sort of this understanding of what maybe kids may do or try as high school students and college students. Heroin was not anything that you could
No.
fathom. So to find needles in a car, it's like, well, whoa, why would there be needles in this car?
And there happened to be an explanation.
Right. This fluky explanation
it
was this diabetic.
Freaky, yeah, it's exactly.
Yeah.
And, heroin is that line that we don't cross over here.
Yes.
When I know better than that anyway, but that's what I wanted to believe. And again, there was nothing else, pushing me in that direction. Another clue was a red flag was when he came home for Christmas vacation.
Right before, a couple months
Yeah,
before
he died in May, and this was in December, and he looked horrible, just horrible, sick as a dog. This is the first for him. He wasn't even able to come to the family celebration that we were having at my brother's house, and again, all of us were sick during that time. I got the flu for the first time in 25 or 30 years. Dan was sick. We were all sick. There was explanations. The thing with Darby is that he was just laying on the couch looking gray. He, would I have thought to look for track marks on his arm? I mean, no.
Right.
And the fact that he wanted to stay home, I don't know. It was how bad he looked, even given flu and all of that. So that was another thing.
Sore.
Yes, that's right. So when we went up to see him, probably it was maybe a couple of months before he overdosed, and he looked actually really good. He was cheerful. He was really happy. He seemed happy, doing well. And I noticed this sore on his neck, and I asked him about it. He says, "Yeah, this sore it won't go away, and the doctors don't know what it is." And I said, "Oh, well." I've been reading a lot about the MRSA infection, and I kind of knew in the back of my head that comes from being in the hospital, being in a hospital situation, and it's a deadly thing. But the source of it is often being in the hospital. And so I did ask him questions. Well, what were you doing, or how do you think that happened? What did the doctors say? And at that point, it was actually getting better. And I said, "Well, Darby, I think I'd like to talk to your doctor about this up at at the UMass Medical Infirmary," which I think is where he told me it was being treated. I don't think it probably was. I think it was probably at the hospital where he had overdosed, because he had an overdose previously a month before, in January. I'm not sure when it was, but it was earlier in that winter. So I think that was another cover-up, and that was another MRSA infection. Another thing is that another red flag was that I had given him a credit card to use temporarily. This was a credit card that I kind of used for my own expenses. I had been laid off, and my severance pay had been kind of running out, and I was kind of this was something I had saved for living expenses until I got another job. And I told him, "Well, you can use this. I know you need." And it was just for normal expenses. I can't remember the circumstances of that, but just I'm giving it to you. I'll pick it up in about a month. And told him not only to use it for gas and any kind of normal expenses. And I noticed that he was using it all the time. I would get these credit card bills, and they were astronomical, and they, for what I expected. And this was very out of character for him. It just was out of character for him to be stealing money from us or to do anything like that. It was, and that caused something in me. That what is going on here? But it's still, well, okay, maybe maybe, it's a tough semester. I don't know. He had a lot going on in his life. He was going to school full time. He worked almost full time. I thought, well, there's a lot of stress involved, but he's got to understand that he can't use this. And he kept using it. And I finally had to come up and just take it. And he apologized, but he wasn't talking to me. He was using it, not talking to me. So that was another big red flag.
His grades.
His grades, he was telling me that everything was wonderful, and they were in the beginning because he kind of showed us, and I got feedback from some of his professors too that they all really loved him, and they enjoyed him in class, and his grades took a nosedive. He probably would have been put on suspension after that, but according to him, and I wanted to believe this, that everything was just great.
Right.
So I don't know whether we had talked before about some of these red flags, and there are probably others that I can't quite remember now. I think there were a number of them, and again, each one on their own. There were logical explanations for the car, for the sore, for the money, for him being sick.
We don't want to know,
and we don't want to know.
We don't want to know. Number one, we don't know again to look necessarily for heroin,
Right.
and we don't want to know.
No, that's really my message here. And I can't speak for Dan. I know, but I will. I know both of us had the same kind of feeling. But for me, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe him. I didn't want to know that, and that is what disabled me from to be able at some point to put all of those. Another thing that was very odd too, and this is important because he had an overdose previously to the fatal overdose, and that's where he got the sore, I believe. And in between that, and during that time when he was in the hospital, we didn't hear from him at all. And we didn't, I didn't talk to him every day, but both of us talked to him regularly, and he would call us as well. I mean, we were very close in that way. We called each other a lot. We totally lost track of him during that time. It was about 2 or 3 weeks. And we were like, just leaving messages. We were calling his friends. And that was a huge thing. And we finally heard from him. And he was he sounded fine. And I wanted to believe him.
Right.
So taken together, all of those things, there's a pattern there. And I'm saying, how could I be so stupid as to not, and I'm not a stupid person. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with your wanting the best for your kids. And wanting them to be happy above all else. And when he said he was happy and he seemed happy, I wanted to believe that, and I was able to sweep the rest of it under the rug. And I think that's what our discussion is here really about.
But it's hard. And the double whammy is, number one, your child is doing something which is illegal, highly negative and harmful to them. So there's a lot to try to grasp, which is I've told my child about drugs, right? It's like, you're like, I've told my child about drugs, and they're smart, and our relationship is contingent upon him or her believing me, and I thought we want to believe when we say to our child, do not do heroin, do not do drugs, and we show them pictures, we show them images, we tell them as much as we can, don't do it. We want to believe that our relationship is strong enough with them that maybe they love us enough, whatever it might be, that they will listen to us. So there's that piece. Then there's the piece about our child intentionally lying to our face. Lying to our face. For Darby to say, oh, this sore is being treated, I don't know what it is, when he more than likely got it at the hospital when he was being treated for an overdose of heroin. Or to say, oh, my grades are great, my grades are fine. When he knew that they weren't. And for those of you that heard his poems that we read, there is a poem written about heroin. He's talking about the blood on his chin. He's writing all about it. Meanwhile, he's saying to his mother and his father, I'm great, things are wonderful. There's no way that at Christmas he didn't know that it was his illness was the effect of his heroin use. but yet, oh, I've got the flu, I'm not feeling well. So again, as parents, we want to believe that we have some control over our children's choices, that they trust us and love us enough that they're not going to do heroin or any other drugs or things we suggest or tell them that they shouldn't do. We don't want to believe that they're lying right to our face. And some of the other behaviors, Alyssa mentioned about her debit card or credit card, oftentimes a huge amount of stealing happens because people are not capable when they're doing heroin. All they care about is heroin, 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 and they're not capable to sustain. You can't really function on heroin. And so a lot of times they're able to sustain or maintain their addiction and their heroin use because they are driving people. People say, well, if you drive me to get my heroin pickup, a dealer might say, if you drive me to pick some up, we use your gas, I'll give you some heroin. So there's a real knowledge that people don't have cash on them or have cash available to them to get heroin, and so they will use a credit card and do all sorts of other ways to help the dealers out to help themselves get heroin and not directly paying for it. The other thing, in that way with like direct money. The other thing is, of course, a lot of stealing happens. You'll see kids will be stealing CDs and then turning around and selling them. They'll be stealing stuff from parents. They'll take stuff from home to sell it to get money or to trade it for heroin. And it is hard to say to your kid, hey, did you take, this jewelry? You don't want to know your kid took the jewelry. And you don't want to know that they're saying, no, I didn't, and they really did. And you certainly don't want to know that they're doing it to go shoot heroin into their body. So it's very... I want to say it's very normal to be in extreme denial when it comes to heroin. And actually, I'm thinking now that this painting behind me was done by my friend who's an artist, Robert McKee. And this is called The Guardian Dog. He looks a little bit like a bear, but he's called The Guardian Dog. And he painted it to represent part of our psychological, our psyche makeup, whatever you want to say, that protects us from knowing things that we're not ready to know about ourselves or perhaps about our life. So I'm just thinking the irony of today we decided to move and have something in our background, and it's the guardian dog. And we all have that, and we have it for a reason. We have it for a reason. Denial is important for a reason, for a certain period of time, because we really cannot handle it. We really can't fathom it. We would just totally break down and not be capable of functioning if there was information that we had. And so Lissa couldn't have all that information. She wasn't in a place to put all that information together for many reasons. And I think it's important to say to parents, to family members, you're doing your best. You did your best. You are doing your best. This is not an easy thing to know for those reasons that we're mentioning. And yes, I am sure there are signs. There are clues, there are signs all over the place. And you haven't seen them. You didn't see them. Now perhaps you are.
And one other, just to tell, to say how deep this denial can go. Mm-hmm. It's not that I have such a clean past myself. I mean, in terms of drugs, I went to school in the late 60s, early 70s. And it's not like I never saw a heroin overdose either, because I have. Mm-hmm. And I have my own drug use to come to terms with, and not heroin, but the drugs that people were using, and I use. And so what I'm saying is, and I'm not saying anything about really making a judgment about that. All I'm saying is that I didn't think I was naive about this. That's what I'm trying to say. Right. But but there is some naivete there, and there is very huge denial. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm thinking other parents can probably relate to that, and especially around this. So how no matter how much you think you know and how savvy you are, you're
going to miss stuff.
You're going to miss stuff
for many reasons.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so part of that is the coming to terms with it and the forgiveness. Because if we're bogged down with the guilt, and the shame, we then don't have the energy that we need to focus on the now and the moment, to be present in solution. And in Lissa's case, because Darby died and all of it came to be, the forgiveness for herself and the reality and the truth and the normalcy of denial is about Alyssa affording herself to be present in the transformation and the growth and to move beyond the old way that she had been to experience a new life. And if you carry all that shame and that blame and you don't forgive yourself, we don't forgive ourselves, it's such a heavy burden to carry. And Darby certainly would never ever have wanted his mother to carry that and to be unhappy. It was his choice. It was
You're
his
right.
choice. Then he worked real hard to keep it a secret.
He
worked really hard to keep it a secret.
He did.
And so
I don't think he wanted to hurt us with this. And ultimately, that is a really a huge takeaway from all of this, is that it is, we each have our path. Our children have their own paths to take, and it doesn't. I mean, I had to come to face this, that ultimately I don't think there was anything I could have done about this. I don't feel responsible for it. On the other hand, I do have something that I can offer to other people if it helps somebody else to see a sign, or and maybe, I don't know. I don't know, and I'll never know. We really didn't get that chance with our son to help him through this or to go through this with him. At the same time, I don't believe that that guilt serves any purpose for the parents or our kids.
Right.
It doesn't serve Darby now, and it doesn't serve me or Dan now. It's this is the outcome of that. This is what I have learned and what I can offer, and that honors him and us. So.
All right. So our next clip that we're going to do, we're going to talk about the day and some of the things that happened after the phone call when Alyssa and Dan went up to the hospital in Northampton.